Good morning, everybody. It's January 2022, and it's time to learn something. We're going to talk about thread. Why is thread so important? Well, it is. It's very important. What I can tell you about embroidery and whatnot is that you want to use the best quality thread you possibly can. So first of all, let's talk about how thread is made. Okay, thread is made in usually one of two ways. It's either taking a natural fiber of some sort and spinning it around and spinning it around and spinning it around and tighten it up so that the fibers get strong and stick to each other, such as silk, cotton, and rayon. Those are all natural fibers. Another way it's made is that it is like a liquid goo, like polyester and nylon. They're actually chemically made, and instead of having natural fibers that are spun together, they are put out like if you take a squirt gun, squirts out of a nozzle, and that's how it causes the fibers. So, and it's very confusing when you're buying fibers. What do I use? You want to use the right thread for the right project. Such as if you're doing embroidery, you want to use an embroidery thread instead of a sewing thread. Here's a sewing thread. It's not very shiny, and it's usually made of cotton or polyester. It's usually too thin it's digitized for a certain thickness, and sewing thread is usually too thin. Cotton, it's too linty. You want something that's going to cut down on the amount of lint in your machine. Can you embroider with this stuff? Sure. They even make a cotton embroidery thread. Where is one? I brought some. Yeah, here's one. This is a cotton embroidery thread, or it can be used. It can be used for quilting. This is a 40 weight or 50 weight cotton, and we're going to talk about weights, because to be honest with you, weights don't mean a whole lot, and I'll tell you how they're formed and why those numbers don't mean much. Okay, but this is going to cause a lot of lint. This is mostly used with quilting, but mostly we use polyester or rayon. Okay, and they have advantages and disadvantages. And we use what's called a 40 weight thread. And again, that's only consistent within the brands that you are familiar with, because a 40 weight in one brand of thread is not necessarily the same as a 40 weight in another brand of thread. It's made up of the fibers that go straight like this, and then they're twisted around to give it strength and stick together. Then they usually take those individual fibers and they spin them again with, like, say, put two together, and they twist it together, and that makes it even thinner, more consistent, and and smoother. So how do you read this mess? And even you can't even tell from the labels half the time what weight it is. So what you have to do is let your fingers be your guide. Get a good quality thread that works for the project that you're used to. Feel it. What you're going to look for in a good thread is that you're going to look for, let me get a darker one so that you can see it. You're going to look for consistency, evenness, smoothness. You want to spool it out. Okay, and you want to feel it. The feel of your thread is going to be what you're looking for. You don't want to see knots. They call them slubs. You don't want to see where two strands are knotted together. You don't want to see places where it's thin, other places where it's thick. You want it to be consistent. Another thing you want to do is, for embroidery, unspool some of that thread. It should, I don't know if you can see this, it should run straight. It shouldn't curl and, just not be icky, because if it curls on the spool, it's going to wrap its way around the spool pin, and you're going to end up with breaking thread and breaking needles and all kinds of stuff. So, you want a good quality thread. In embroidery, we also use bobbin thread, which is lingerie bobbin thread, which is a super thin, it's called 60 weight here, and it's super thin. And we use that in embroidery because we're putting a lot of thickness of thread fibers into our project, so why put as much thickness on the back where it's not going to be seen as thickness on the front where you do want it to be seen. And you want those threads to wrap to the back. You don't want to see the white little thingy sticking up, because that could mean your tension is off. So anyway, let's talk about, and there's different kinds of embroidery thread. Like I said, we mostly use either polyester or rayon, and they have their advantages and disadvantages. You'll see from, these are both similar in color, and I don't know if you can see it, but one is brighter than the other. Okay, this one is shinier and prettier. This is a rayon. The thing with rayon is it breaks pretty easily. Okay, and that's a good thing and not a good thing at the same time. So if it breaks, if it's shiny and pretty, it's going to give you a really nice stitch. If it tends to break, you're going to get a flatter one, where polyester is a little duller. It's not quite as shiny, although I think Floriani threads and Isacord threads are a little bit shinier than the Robus and Anton that we carry in our store. Polyester, it's stronger. It's harder to pull and break, so it's built for high-speed embroidery. This disadvantage to the polyester, so you have the advantages, is it's stronger, it can sew for longer, won't break as often, but it has, I don't know if you can see this, it has a tiny, very tiny bit of stretch. Not much stretch, but it's enough stretch to cause the item to pucker a little more. So I countermand this by normal tensions on my machine are 4.0, and when I'm using polyester, I'll go down to 3.8, and then I get a flatter, less puckering embroidery. These are shinier, but it tends to break more often. The other disadvantage is that this is a natural fiber. This has got a shelf life of about 20 years. Polyester has, well, right now they're saying 50 years, but I've got some polyester threads that are even older than, that are, I think, well, they're about 50 years old. They're still fine. You don't want to use these for sewing, because there is not only the weight of a thread, but how many plies it has and how tightly twisted it is. What makes these shiny is the fact that they are loosely twisted and are more able to reflect the light. Where this is a polyester thread, okay, it's sewing thread, it's 100% polyester. This is also polyester. They are both the same, chemically the same thread. The difference is that this one is what they call trilobal polyester, which means that it has been spun. Instead of, most fibers are round, this one is triangular. So whenever the light hits a flat side, it reflects more light. That's the big difference between these two. Plus, these are tightly twisted, and it's, I don't know how many ply it is. I have to take it apart to figure, and we'll talk about ply in just a second. And this one is, it's tighter. If you try to sew a seam with polyester, it'll hold for a little while, but it doesn't hold up to something called abrasion. So if you have this in a garment and it's rubbing back and forth as you wear it, touching the skin, touching the fabric and whatnot, and it's being worn a lot, it's going to shred very quickly and your seam is going to split. Where this one is very tightly wrapped, very, very tightly wrapped, and I think it has got 3 ply instead of 2. It depends on the brand. Whether it has 2 or 3 ply doesn't really matter to me. As long as it's a good, reputable thread, it'll work fine. And so, like I said, this one's made for sewing seams. This one is not. Okay? Can I use this in quilting? Sure. I've used it for quilt. Why? Because you don't wear quilts. I would not use this for sewing on the binding though, because it's not, that binding thread's gonna, that's a big wear place. I wouldn't use this to seam the quilt together either, because the seams are gonna pop eventually, where, you know. Now, there is a myth. If you use cotton fabric in your quilting, you must use cotton thread. That is not true. Cotton thread does not wear out or break or cut the fibers on the fabric of a quilt any faster than polyester. So it's a myth. You can use either for quilting. Use what you like. And we'll talk about quilting in a little bit. The weights of thread can get very, very, very confusing. Very confusing. Why do you want to use a good quality thread and the right type? Like for quilting, you want the stress on any garment or quilt or whatever is on the thread. And it's more so with quilting and embroidery, because while it is stitching, you're getting stress in all different directions. So usually when you sew, things just go straight. Keep going, and things are going in one direction. But when you're quilting, free motion quilting, or doing embroidery, that quilt is going in all directions, and the stresses on the thread are much greater, which is why I like polyester thread, because this tends to break more when it's stressed out. How you should store thread? Not like I do for the most part. You should store your thread in boxes or cabinets or drawers away from sun, and you want to keep it in a climate controlled environment. In other words, not out in your garage where it gets cold, hot, humid, whatever. Keep it out of the sun. Now, I have mine on those spool pins that are sticking on the wall, if you've seen those pictures. Yeah, it's not the best way to store thread. I don't care. I like my wall of color. Plus, I don't allow light on those threads. So the light is staying, I keep the shades drawn all the time on that side of the room. I don't want it to deteriorate my thread. Okay, so there's different kinds of weights. There's and you'll hear about S twist, Z twist, right hand twist, left hand twist. Now, twist is important, and the number of plies is important with yarn. Why? Because a single ply yarn, which means it's just twisted and you are only using one layer, what happens is that when you're knitting, say if you're knitting, instead of like, you get this and with knits, instead of it being even and symmetrical, a lot of times it'll be like this if it's a right twist, or like this if it's a left twist. Okay, what the heck's twist? What am I talking about? Okay, that means the way it is twisted. So when they take the yarns, say we're going to talk about a natural fiber like a cotton, and they have Egyptian cotton is short fiber cotton and long fiber cotton. When they're talking about the different fibers on the cotton, to me it's kind of silly to talk about that, because a short maybe 1/8 inch or less than 1/8 of an inch long are the fibers, but a long staple cotton or an Egyptian cotton, it's 1/8 of an inch or bigger, and most of them are around 1/8 of an inch, so they have to be twisted together. If not, you'll have a pile of fuzz. So they have to twist them. A single twist means that they have like twisted it, like you take a roll of toilet paper and twist it, you'll see. Okay, now if you how to tell whether, if you really want to, and you want to see what a right and a left twist is, here's your fiber. If you take a magnifying glass and all the fibers are going this way, it is an S twist. And why do I say that? If you take this and you take this and you go like here, here, and here, it looks like an S. And then if they go the other way and you take the fiber it's going and you cover at the top, it makes a Z. That's called a Z-twist. That's the easiest way to remember it. Why would you care? Because I really don't care. Most, when they're talking about an S-twist or a Z-twist, if you have two fibers, one will be a Z-twist. The second, when they put the two fiber, they'll do one fiber and say it's a Z-twist. Then you do another fiber, it's a Z-twist. When you put them together to make a two-ply, you have to turn it the other way around and spin it the other way to make a coherent fiber. The tighter this twisting is, the more smooth and more strong that fiber is, which is why this one's very, say, this was, like, when you see this one, let's just say that one would be your sewing, this would be your embroidery, so you would see the difference in the twist. Doesn't matter. Most American thread is a Z-twist, which means the last twist it goes through is a Z or a, I think, I don't even know if it's right or left. This is something who cares about. Okay, when you're going to the store, you want to look for smoothness. You want to look for consistency. You want it to be the right thickness as well. Also realize that in natural fibers, dark thread is thicker than light thread. Why? Because in the natural fiber world, all thread comes out this color, pretty much, really light. Then they put it in a vat of dye after it's already spun, let it sit there and soak up the dye, and the longer it soaks, the darker the thread. So darker threads are two things. They're a little bit thicker, and you'd have to be up close, and I don't think you can really notice it. These are the same brand, but the dark one is a little bit thicker than the light one. Just for info. So, okay, and also the dark threads don't last as long because they sit in that dye and it's more caustic over time. Okay, so that's your S and your Z twist. Okay, next thing is the weight. You hear 40 weight, 100 weight, text 49, text this. Then you're like, huh? Okay, I'm going to tell this to you one time and then you guys are going to forget all about it, because really, does it even matter? Okay, now what the weight is. You have text system, you have the weighted system, you have the denier system, and you have the number system, and then there's a composition system, and you go, huh? Okay, it's all too confusing. But two things, realize that text, when it says text 49, what text means, you take a fixed length, in other words 1,000 meters or yards or whatever, and then you weigh it. And every gram, 1 gram is 1 text. So if it says 49, text 49, that means that 1,000 yards, 1,000 yards weighs 49 grams. Okay, why is that important? Doesn't really matter. But anyway, the higher the number, the thicker the thread. Okay, and the so yes, and the same is with all the weighted ones. When it says 40 weight thread, it's doing it a little bit differently. What it's doing there, it is saying how much thread does it take to make 1 kilogram. So therefore, if it takes 30 kilometers of thread to make 1 kilogram, then it's 30 weight thread. It's still very confusing. So in the text system, the higher the number, the thicker the thread. In the weighted system, it's the opposite. So the higher the number, the thinner the thread. But it is relative. Because you see these twists, okay? 1,000 yards of highly twisted thread, or let's just say 1 gram of highly twisted thread is much shorter than loosely twisted thread, because as it's twisted, the length shrinks. So that's why these numbers don't mean anything, because if it's tightly twisted, then these feel the same thickness, but they're different numbers. So, okay. Just divide all thread into heavy, medium, and lightweight thread. Okay, thin, medium, and thick thread. And that's really all you need to do. Let your fingers be your guide. So like for sewing, what you're looking for in sewing thread. In sewing thread, you're looking for thin. The thinner, the better. Because in sewing thread, you don't want this thread taking up extra thickness in your seam. So the thinner the thread, your seams are going to lie flatter. Where if you're using a thicker thread, and this is a Gutermann, which was one of my favorite. I like Gutermann and Metrazine, or Metler, for sewing. And both of these are the same pretty much weight. But one is a little thicker than the other. Depends on what you're looking for. So in sewing thread, I have used Aurifil. I have used Gutermann. I've used Metler. Katona, Madeira Katona thread is very nice. It's a cotton. I've even used this quilting thread. Now this quilting thread is noticeably thicker. And if we had an in-person class, I'd be handing around all these threads for you guys to check them out. This one is a little thicker, and it's mainly for quilting. So if you remember, the thicker the thread, the less you can see the stitch. The thinner the thread, the less you can see the stitch. The thicker the thread, the more you see the stitch. So it depends on what. Like for a top stitch thread, I'd probably use this because it is thicker. There's also some really, well, these are, I would call mediums, okay? Other thick threads would be, this is Sulky. It says it's a 12 weight. This is a Robus and Anton, and it says it's a 25 weight. What you would think the 25 weight would be thinner than the 12 weight in the weighted system. They look, in fact, oddly enough, this is the 12 weight, this is the 25 weight. To me, they seem exactly the same. So one, that's probably telling you one is twisted tighter than the other. But you can use these for top stitching. I don't really like them for quilting because they're really too thick. Okay. Other really thick threads is this is called what is it called? It's made by Metler, but it is, I call this buttonhole twist thread. Coordinate is its actual name, coordinate thread, but it's really thick. It's almost like tatting thread or crochet thread. And this is for making buttonholes, or whenever you're making buttonholes in a coat. I put this inside the stitching to strengthen that. Other thick threads you have are, here's the one I don't like, okay? This Coats & Clark. I'm not crazy about dual duty, and it is a cotton wrapped, and the interior is a core of polyester. The reason I don't like, there's a couple reasons why I don't like dual duty. It's very linty. That's one thing. I've also had some problems with inconsistent. I can feel thicknesses, some places thick, some places thin. It's not real super consistent. But the biggest complaint that I have is how this spool is made. But there's usually a notch in the side, and that will instantly catch your thread. So usually I file them off. They're not there. Because I will use this in my older machines. This I don't use in the newer machines. It just causes, a lot of machines don't like this thread, and mine are included. Other thick threads are used for serging or for couching, and this is a Designer 6 by YLI. This is a Designer 7 by Robus and Anton, and it's almost like a cord. This is to be used in the loopers of your serger. I can also use it for bobbin work, and I can use it for couching. Difference is this is rayon and this is polyester. Otherwise, they don't make this one anymore, but I still have a bunch of it. Other specialty threads are, this is a new one here. It's Wash Away Vanish Extra by YLI, or Wash Away Extra. There's Vanish Extra. And I like this stuff because it dissolves away, so I do a lot of basting with this. When we do the trapunto class, you'll need some of this. If you want to try trapunto, you're going to need some wash away thread. God, don't use it for regular seaming. Okay, you also have elastic thread, and it's real stretchy. And it is used for, you can put it in your bobbin. I don't usually use this in the needle, but I will put it in the bobbin in order to gather up. I used to use it when I was doing shirring for, what do you call that stuff? Smocking. Okay, that's when I used it. Okay, then we have, what's this one? Fusible thread. Fusible thread is really nice sometimes to use in a bobbin when you're doing embroidery and you're making a patch, because if you use this as your bobbin thread, then you can heat set that item to a background fabric. So fusible is nice to use. And then we have, this is Lana thread, which is wool. Again, it can be used as bobbin work. You can use this one in a needle. It's very thick, but you can use it. Now, we'll talk about size of needles because you need to use a specialty needle with these. Okay, these are for either bobbin work or for sergers and loopers. Bobbin work, couching on, and this is what they call candlelight thread, and it's very, very thick and a really pretty metallic. Really nice. Okay, this is also a metallic serger thread, which is also, I like to use it in the loopers. Okay, now here's the, oh, this one is a fun one to use. Okay, it's solar active. Can't see it right now, but it looks white. I take it out in the sun, it's going to turn pink. It's really cool, or whatever color. This one happens to be pink. I love this stuff. It's fun. Okay, nylon thread. This is called, there's two different kinds. There's nylon, which is very thin, and I do like it for invisible stitching. It comes in white, and all of these come in smoke or in white, or in clear. For the clear, the advantage to the nylon is it's less light reflective, which means if you stitch with it, it's not really invisible. It's still all light reflective. This is less light reflective. It's kind of got a matte finish. And then there's a polyester. And a polyester usually doesn't break as easily. The nylon breaks rather easily. Polyester doesn't break as easily, but it is more light reflective. It also does not melt with an iron, although don't turn that iron on to super hot. Turn that iron super hot, it's going to melt probably the fabric first. But the nylon's going to break very easily. Okay. Other specialty threads, put these over here, we're done with them, is we have hand threads. These are hand quilting threads. Okay, one is made by Aurifil, and it's a very, very thin thread, and can be used in substitute, like in needle turn, because this one is super thin. This is a super thin one, you can barely see it. So if you do applique and you do like a pin stitch or a blanket stitch, you're less likely to see this. This is hand quilting thread. Okay, hand quilting thread is, this one is also very thin and can be used for needle turn. This is YLI Select thread, very thin. It's quilting thread, but if you've got a thread that says it's for hand quilting, do not use it in your machine ever. Why? Because this thread is coated with paraffin or wax. That's going to mess up your machine, so don't use it. Okay. Also, another one I like to use for both quilting and piecing and needle turn is silk thread. Silk thread's rather expensive, but you don't need that much of it. It is ultra thin. This is what they call number 100. There's number 100 and there's 100 weight. They are not the same thing. Okay. but I don't know which is which, so I let my fingers be my guide. All of these say they are number 100 threads. This one is nice and thin. This one is made by Superior. It is only slightly thicker than the Wildeye silk. This one is a Coats and Clark's, or no, this one is a Clover silk, and it's a little thicker, but it is a very beautiful thread, great for decorative stitching. Very pretty thread. And then there's this really thick Coats and Clark's pure silk thread, and this is really old thread. Really old, but it's still good. Silk thread lasts a long time unless, I think, yeah, it's still strong. This thread is the thread I used to use to darn my point shoes, because in the old days they would make you darn the tips of your point shoes so that the tips would last longer, and you would spend hours and hours laying this thread over the surface of your point shoes. So this, let's see, I stopped dancing in 1983. So it's the last time I had point shoes on. So that was 1983. This thread is rather old. It's still good. I don't know what I would use it for now, maybe couching. But it is beautiful thread. And I keep it because it reminds me of my point shoes. And it was a lot of fun. I obviously can't do that anymore. Okay, these are different embroidery threads. Again, these are rayon. This is embroidery thread. This is a polyester from Isacord. This is a Madeira, and it's a stack wound. And this is from Superior Threads, and it's a variegated. And this one is sulky. This is the only one I won't use. Nothing wrong with the thread. There's something a lot wrong with the way it's set up. I don't like these little tiny spools. It's going to be really corkscrewy, terrible. Okay, now speaking of these, whenever you have what they call cross-wound thread, I'm trying to find a good one that's going to show crisscrossing, okay? If you see crisscrossing here, this thread, like this one, this is designed to come off the edge of the thread. So you're either going to use your horizontal spool pin or you're going to use a vertical spool pin, and they have those cast iron ones that are really nice, that if you don't have a vertical spool thread holder on your machine, you can use the vertical one. You just buy it separate, set it to the side of your machine, thread your machine as normal, and you don't have to use the stupid thread caps. When you're using a thread cap, you want it to be the appropriate size. If you're using the horizontal, you do not have to have a thread cap on there. Usually I set mine on my machine this way, and I don't even use the thread cap. If it keeps falling off, then use the small one. If you have it turned this way, you want the large one on. If you have one like this, use a medium, the medium one. You want it to be just slightly larger than whatever the spool is. But again, most of the time I'll run it this way, and I don't put any spool cap. If you're running it vertical, you don't need a spool cap. Now if you're using a vertical and you're having trouble with it, well, let's use this one. This is quilting thread, but you'll get the idea. Thread nets are wonderful things, and you can buy them in the store or at any sewing machine store, or you can do like I do. These are the same nets that they use to ship flowers, football mums, tulips, roses, all kinds of things. You'll find these. So if you go to the floral department at Giant, ask them to save them for you for a couple of days. They'll be happy to, and you'll go and you'll have thread nets forever. But if you have trouble and you're using, say, a vertical spool pin, and it goes up underneath like this, and that thread is under here, it's going to catch. And anytime that does that, you're going to end up with a broken needle because it's going to be stuck, and it keeps going underneath. Especially important with a serger, because the serger has got those cones and it sits underneath and it can cause problems. So how you use these is you put this inside the bottom. Metallic thread, it's usually a problem because that threads always want to puddle at the bottom, and you do this, okay? And it just, you only need a little bit at the bottom because that keeps the thread from going underneath. It's never going to go any further, and it's not going to get underneath of the spool and cause problems. So I recommend these a lot. I also, threads like this and my serger threads, they sit in a drawer and they make a big mess because those threads tangle. So if I put that on there, I can still see the color and that thread's not going to tangle. So I store my threads like that. Okay. Okay, we talked about sewing threads, and now we didn't talk about quilting threads or serger threads. Or quilting threads. Get those? Sorry. Grab these. Okay, these are, you guys out of the way. Out of the way. These are quilting threads here. They're usually thicker or thinner. Again, you can use either, oh, this is serger. These, different thicknesses. Okay, different thicknesses, different setups. For quilting, if you're doing free motion quilting, you've got a lot of stress going on because you are going in all different directions. So therefore, you want a good quality, strong thread. Certain machines have certain favorites. Like there's a thread called Bottom Line, which is super, super thin, and I really, really like the thread. I only use it in the bobbin, mostly because my machines hate it. Every machine I have hates that thread. Yet, this one is so fine by Superior Thread, it is just as thick as the Bottom Line. And why is there a knot in here? Oh, it's because of the end I cut it. Okay. It's just as thin, but it has a matte finish, and this is actually my favorite thread. Also, there's one called Glide. I don't have any here, which is another really good quilting thread. But you want a good quality thread because a cheap thread's going to constantly break on you, and you're going to get very frustrated with it. So this is a cotton thread, which is a 50 weight, and it's a little thicker. And in quilting thread, the thicker the thread, the more you see the stitches. The thinner the thread, the more you see the pattern. Okay, this is some of a commercial one. I don't know who makes it. Oh, this one's dual duty. I'll use it in the quilter. If you have an external tensioning system, you know, like regular tensions that you run through, disc tensioning, as in the Jane, I think it's called the Accomplished, the quilting machines, the Regent, the Regalia, the Millennium, APQS Millennium, the iNovus. You can pretty much use any thread in there, but again, it's got to be a good quality, strong thread, because you usually, after a while, you're going to be stitching pretty quickly. Okay. If you have a thread, this is called stack wound. Okay, and whether it be quilting or an embroidery machine, this one you're going to want to use on a horizontal spool pin, because this one should spool, and this one's made by Signature, and I can't find the end. Okay, I can't find the end. Well, this King Tut is also what they call stack. There's cross wound and stack wound. This one is stack wound. In other words, this one is just evenly back and forth, where these are cross wound because you see X's. These are designed to come off the edge of the spool. These are designed to come off like straight. So you want something that rolls either this way or this way to get a good stitch. That is very important if you're using a metallic thread. Where to put? We didn't talk about. We'll talk about. Well, let's talk about metallic threads now. Metallic thread. This one is a hologram thread, and I have got a thread net. This is what I call Yugo's Amazing Tape, and I've got several spools of this stuff, and it's nothing but vinyl, and it's used to seal in, because see what a mess that makes? And this seals it in. So that's how I store a lot of it. Another thing you can use is press and seal. Don't use Scotch tape. Do not close your spools together with Scotch tape. That gummy stuff is going to make a mess. So you can use press and seal, which won't come off on your thread, or the Yugo's Amazing Tape. And this is reusable, so if it gets cloudy and it won't stick anymore, just take some rubbing alcohol on a scrap piece of fabric and wipe it off, and it's brand new again. I've had this stuff for years. So anyway, this is metallic thread, and metallic thread is beautiful for embroidery and top stitching. However, it's a pain in the neck, and here's why. It is just like that elastic thread. It's very, very stretchy. So this, you want it to come out straight, because I don't think you can see it unless you were here in person. If I twist it, I only see a light glimmer every once in a while. I also have areas of thick and thin. That's going to wreak havoc with the tensions. So this is actually designed to come off straight, because then you get consistent stitching, tensioning, and also it's more light reflective. I love to use this stuff. This stuff is absolutely beautiful. I'll even hand stitch with it. It's beautiful stuff. But okay, and then there's this kind of metallic thread. Where'd it go? There it is. It's regular metallic thread. Metallic thread is also beautiful, and I love to use it. But see, it stretches as well. I don't know if you can get closer together. It stretches also. So here, you might want to get a pencil and paper if you've not heard this speech before. And if you go to my classes a lot, every time we use metallic thread, you get the same speech over and over. I know I sound like a broken record. But how you make this stuff work in your embroidery machine. A, use a vertical spool thread delivery system. In other words, have it come off the top. Okay, you want it to come off. You want it to sew with as little back pressure as possible. So you want it to come straight up. And so therefore, you don't want, there's no tension here. Okay, if it's puddling underneath, use a thread net. That'll keep it from going underneath and breaking thread and breaking needles. The other thing is that you need to slow down your machine. Normal stitching on the high-end machines is about 1,000 stitches per minute. You want to slow that down to 350 stitches per minute, or as slow as that machine will go. It's going to give you less stretch and a better stitch. The other thing, so that's one. That's two. Three, it must be a good quality thread. Cheap thread is going to be a mess, because what cheap thread does is it's aluminum foil wrapped around a core. That's what cheap thread is. If you're paying less than $12 a spool, leave it alone. You're going to mess up your machine. Don't even buy it. Don't waste your money, because you're going to be very frustrated. And the expensive thread, that aluminum foil, before it's twisted around the nylon or polyester core, the aluminum foil is glued to a layer of rice paper. So therefore, it's not going to flake off in your machine. Cheap thread is going to flake off in your machine and cause, not damage, but it's going to need to be cleaned out, and it'll cause problems even after you're done using it. So use a good quality thread. So that's the third thing. You also, so it's, let me write this down. 1, slow down. Slow down. Quality thread. Quality thread is the second thing. Okay. 3, vertical spool tree. I call it a spool tree. 4, lower your tension. Lower your tension. I-O-N. Tension is normally 4.0. What you want instead is you want to go to you want to start at 3.0, take it down to 3.0, and on my machine likes it at 2.8 tension. Lot lower. Because if you're getting shredding and breaking of thread, you go to 3.8, it's still doing it. Go down to 3.6. Still doing it. 3.4. You're getting really frustrated by now because you keep lowering. It keeps happening. If you're using metallic thread, start at 3.0 and be prepared to go lower than that. Okay? And then last but not least, you want to use the right needle. You're either going to use a Metallica needle, and I recommend a size 14 needle, or use a top stitch needle. And next time we will talk about needles, because we have not, well, we're just going to today talk about the threads, because you want to use the right needle for the right purpose, right thing. So bottom line, just in the quick note, you want to use an embroidery needle for embroidery. You want to use a metallic needle for metallic thread, or a top stitch needle. For the thicker, how you can tell you've got the right needle is if you thread your needle, and I'll show you this next week or next month. You'll thread the needle, or put thread through the eye of the needle, and then if it doesn't move smoothly, that needle eye is too small for the thread that you have. So you want to use the right size and the right type of needle. And we're going to talk more about needles next time. Okay. Serger threads, we have some of the favorite brands I have are, this is Maxi-Lock, which I use. I like the Madeira. This is a serger thread. YLI, this is a woolly nylon, only to be used in the loopers. I like that. And then actually, you can use any thread you want. If you're going to use a thread like this, because this is a good time in your loopers to use up all these old threads. So what you do is you put this on your spool pin, put your thread on the top, put this over top of it, and now it's going to bypass, especially these Coats and Clark things where they're all rough and yucky on the edge. This will bypass that so that you will get that thread spooling off nice and easily. Okay, and let's see, let's talk about tension. Tensions can be so much trouble. Anything on there, especially for quilters. If you're doing embroidery, you want to use the right embroidery bobbin case. Now, new machines came with 2 bobbin cases. One has like a purple dot in the middle of it on the silver part on the bottom, and and that's designed for pre-wound bobbins. Pre-wound bobbins come in what they call the 60 weight, but if you wind your own bobbins, because you can use regular thread, you're going to want to use the sewing bobbin case. And why? Because those bobbin cases are set at different tensions. So if you're having tension problems, you want to first of all clean out your bobbin area. Use a nice brush. The brush that came with the machine is useless. Use a paintbrush or a blush brush, works really good. Now if you have a bobbin case like this is to my long arm, you can play with the tensions. I don't recommend you can get an extra bobbin case if you have the oscillating bobbin, you know, the rotary one that goes on where you're dropping your bobbin in. Get an extra one that you can play with the tensions. But this one is an M bobbin, it's a big one. And you want the bobbin to come out like this, and you hold it up, and it should stand up but not lift. Okay? Put this one in. This one is, see, I can lift it up, and that would be okay for sewing. It's not okay for quilting. It shouldn't lift up at all. Okay? So you want to, it's usually a tug of war like this. You know, you have your batting or your fabric, and you want those upper threads and the lower threads to interlock inside of your fabric. And if it doesn't, then you got problems, because the wrong tension, the wrong thread can cause a lot of problems. It can cause shredding or breaking of thread. And when you have shredding or breaking of thread, 9 times out of 10, your tensions are too tight. Okay? or you're using the wrong needle. The eye's not big enough, so it's shredding and breaking your threads. If you have a long arm, your needle may not be put in there correctly. Also, check the needle. Make sure everything is good, that it's not a bad needle. You can get shredding and breaking for all kinds of reasons. And there's a lot of different things that can cause it cause things to go wrong. So with quilting, I usually start with making sure my bobbin tension is loose enough. And then I will adjust my needle tension. With embroidery, what I want you to do when you start to embroider is everything feels good, everything looks good, that embroidery is perfect, and you've done correct hooping with the correct stabilizer and yada yada yada, all that good design. If everything is going well, what I want you to do is close your eyes, hold on to that, and thread everything, pull up that bobbin thread, close your eyes and pull at it and sort of memorize how that feels, because that's how it should feel. Okay. Same thing, put the presser foot down, pull on that needle a little bit, pull it to the back, or what, pull to the back, because you pull it to the side, you're going to bend your needle. And you will notice that needle tension is considerably tighter. Okay, it should be. But also feel it. Close your eyes, learn what feels right, what is good. That way, if you have a problem, you've already got it to memory what it should feel like. So if all of a sudden you start getting a lot of nesting on the bottom, or a lot of thread really to the bottom, and the tensions look wrong, and you pull on that bobbin thread and it comes pulling out quickly, oh, you know, something's wrong with that bobbin. And it could be a lot of things that could be wrong with the bobbin. It could be you've dropped the bobbin and it's bent or cracked, especially if it's a metal bobbin. I've got a lot of bobbins that look icky, that are terrible, because I've stepped on them or Lily has stolen them and bit them. And now they're compressed, so they don't wind out right. Okay, it could be that your bobbin area is dirty, so clean that out. Make sure your bobbin area is nice and clean. So the first thing, take a deep breath. Okay, this is not brain surgery, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, first thing I do is check your threading. Make sure you have threaded the machine correctly. You could have missed something. I do it all the time. So when you call and say, hey, I'm having tension issues, what we usually tell you to do is just rethread your machine. Make sure it's okay. Make sure that bobbin is in there correctly, because it's easy to put it in backwards. And if it's backwards, it's going to bypass the check spring and you're going to get bad tensions. So check the bobbin. Make sure it's in correctly. Make sure that it is wound correctly. If you have a bobbin, let me find one here. Here's a bobbin. It should be even. Okay, you shouldn't have one side higher than the other. Make sure that it's wound even. It shouldn't be all gushy. Okay, so if you squeeze it, it shouldn't be all gushy like that. Should be nice and tight in there. You want to if you wind your own bobbins, don't wind them so fast, because then you get them wound too tight. That can also cause those threads to stick into each other and give you tension problems. So to make sure you slow it down, don't do it so tight. If it's really gushy, you might have missed the pre-tensioner, because there's a tension disc in the bobbin area. It may not be, the thread may not be seated in there correctly. If it's gushy, you're not going to get good tensions. Also, you don't want it to be overwound. Pre-wound bobbins are notorious for being overwound. The thread should never come off over the lip right here. It should always be inside. I'd rather you wind that bobbin and stop it a little short than to have it wind too much. Also, if you wind the plastic bobbins, like the ones that came with the machine and the ones you buy, are usually a thicker plastic. The ones that come pre-wound, can you use them again? Well, I can say I do. I do use them a few times. But they're made of an inferior type of plastic. it's going to bend more. If you wind it too tight and too full, it bulges out. The plastic starts to bulge out, and therefore now your bobbin's not sitting in there correctly. A really, really good place for information about thread and needles and tensions and everything is if you go to superiorthreads.com. Go up in the top for their videos, or you can even go to YouTube and search in Superior Threads, and he's got a whole bunch of stuff. His is the most comprehensive, and there's about 30 videos all about thread and needles. Much more than I could ever go into in an hour or so. Okay, so anyway, once you've checked your bobbins, make sure everything is good. You want to, if you weren't having problems and you're having problems now, try to stop and think about what changed. What did you do differently from the time that it was working till the time it's not working? Okay, did you wind the bobbin? So it could be the bobbin. Check the needle. What did you change the needle? Did you change the fabric? All kinds of things. So you want to find out. Oh, you want to think to yourself and get it. And before you call the dealer and say, or service technician, write all this down. Say, hey, I rethreaded it. I checked the bobbin. I did this, and I, whatever you were doing and whatever you tried, tell Justin, who's our guy, what you were doing and what did and what didn't work. Because if you make a change and it doesn't change things, that wasn't the problem. It's going to be something else. Okay, you also want to make one small change at a time and then test it. Only do one thing at a time, because if you change your bottom tension and your top tension, how do you know which one was the right one? You don't. Okay, you want to keep track. Like I said, if it doesn't make a difference, keep track of what you did. It's probably not the issue. Okay, I guess other things you can do is you want to play detective. Okay, you want to, if you get a random loose stitch, okay, what did it? Try, if you have a random stitch, it's a thread delivery problem. It's not coming off the spool correctly. It's back spinning. It's doing something. You might want to try the thread nets. Clean out your bobbin area. Did you drop that bobbin? Did you wind it too full? Do you have too much oil on your machine? Okay, for the long arms, we have to oil them. And you may have too much oil, okay? Sometimes you might want to use bobbin washers. If you're quilting and you get this thing called eyelashing, which means if you turn the quilt over, you're going to see these little lines that looks like eyelashes. You might want to put in bobbin washers, which are Teflon. They look like reinforcements. They sit inside the bobbin case. Okay, you might have your bobbin in backwards. Okay, are you having problems, like if you're quilting? If it only happens when you go left to right, it could be that your needle's not in there straight, okay? Or you're pulling, or you're using inconsistent, or you're going too fast. Every time you have a problem, and one thing I do have to say is that the more experience you get, every time you have a problem and you solve it, the next problem is easier to solve. And so it's okay. Whenever you get a thread nest, which is a glob at the bottom of underneath your fabric, 9 times out of 10, that's a bad thread. It's bad threading. Okay, breaking your needle. If you're always breaking your needles, 9 times out of 10, you either got your tensions too tight, or you're moving your hands too fast. In other words, you're pulling. Same thing with the embroidery. If you've got a particularly obnoxious thick fabric, you want to slow down your embroidery machine because it might be going too fast and it's ending up bending that needle a little bit. So, timing is everything. and it could be, like I said, a thread delivery problem. If you have a long arm, this thing has greatly changed how my life has been with this relationship with the long arm. It's called a Tawa bobbin case tension gauge. This only works for bobbin cases like this. It's got to be a bobbin case like this. It won't work it on the black ones. They have them, this one's for the M bobbins, and they also have it for the L bobbins if you've got a regular machine. So you would thread the bobbin case. I'm going to snap this in. And what I like about this is that I have set mine so no matter what thread I have in there, I want the same. I want it to be between 150 and 180 pounds of pressure. So therefore when I run it through, look at this one. This is way, it says 200. That tension is too high. Also another thing, notice this is a cardboard. Watch as I pull it. Look at go back and forth. Okay, that's telling me that bobbin is no good because it's cardboard and it's flexing on the sides of the bobbin case sometimes and not other times. So, you know what I'm going to do with this? I'm going to get an extra bobbin and I'm going to rewind it because this bobbin, this cardboard side is terrible. Okay, now here's another one. This one I will put that I wound myself. And put this in here. And every time I wind a bobbin, I test it. And see, this one is could be a little tighter because it's only at about 110. Oh, that's not too bad. It's staying pretty steady. But it needs to be tightened. And then you would use your screwdriver and tighten the tension. Just a tiny, like an eighth of a turn. Okay, there. Oh, now it's too tight. It just broke on me. Yeah, that's too tight now. So I'd go back it up. So like I said, this has saved me a lot of time because every time I wind a bobbin, I test it. If it's not right, then I can adjust it or see what's wrong. Okay, any questions about threads? You can always reach me at Waltz Quilts, that's WALTZQUILT @yahoo.com. So anyway, see you guys next time. Love you. Bye.